May's Arch 15th, 1871. A bitter wind swept through Milwaukee's 3rd Ward, rattling shutters, carrying the scent of coal smoke and baking bread. In that chill, 12-year-old Violet Mueller spoke 3 words that would fracture the illusion of safety in her tightly knit German immigrant community. Herr Kellerman burned. The rest of the phrase fell into the icy night, but the meaning hung like smoke in the air. A secret no child or adult was meant to utter. Johann Kellerman, a man revered for his generosity, whose loaves fed orphans every Sunday, had been dead for 2 weeks. His body, discovered frozen in the Milwaukee River, had been dismissed by authorities as an unfortunate accident. But Violet, barely literate and painfully small, had glimpsed into a darkness the world insisted didn't exist. A fire, 7 years prior, in Hamburg, Germany. A fire that consumed the lives of 6 children had been his confession, whispered behind the confessional's sacred wooden screen. She had translated it. She had remembered it. And in a moment of unguarded truth, she had revealed it. Milwaukee's 3rd Ward lived in a fragile bubble of faith and tradition. Bakeries and breweries lined cobblestone streets, the air thick with yeast and fermented hops. Families clung to rituals that transported them from hardship in the old world to hope in the new. At the heart of it all, St. Michael's Church stood like a fortress of limestone and shadow, its twin spires reaching toward heaven while keeping the darker truths tightly sealed within. Its priests were Irish, its parishioners German, and in the gaps between languages, sins whispered themselves into young Violet's ears. The church had found a translator in her, a child with an uncanny gift for languages, able to move seamlessly between German and English, able to carry the weight of confession in her mind without faltering. Yet memory is not loyalty. Memory is steel. And Violet's mind, sharp and unyielding, stored every whispered sin, every stolen coin, every moment of cruelty. It was a record that belonged to God, or so they had told her. But God does not intervene when men hide their darkness behind ritual, nor when institutions burn evidence to protect the facade of piety. And Violet, a girl of 12, was about to become the most dangerous keeper of secrets Milwaukee had ever seen. Tonight, you will descend into the story of Violet Mueller. You will see the machinery of secrecy, the gears of corruption turning behind the walls of faith, and you will confront truths that were never meant to be spoken aloud. By the end, nothing will feel safe. You will understand that some knowledge changes a man forever, and that girl, small and quiet, held the power to shatter an entire community with nothing but words. Violet's chair in the confessional booth was small, almost invisible, a silent witness to the confessions that spilled like blood from the hearts of men and women desperate to unburden themselves. From that cramped alcove, she heard everything. Names, dates, betrayals, crimes hidden in plain sight. Some were small sins, the kind born of poverty or fear. Others were monstrous. And always, the priests insisted on discretion, their authority absolute. What you hear here, they said, belongs to God alone. But God did not shield the innocent from human corruption. Johann Kellerman's sins had been whispered in that very chamber. He had been a man who fed orphans in daylight and burned children in shadow. And Violet had understood it, not as abstract horror, but as an immediate, visceral reality. Her young mind stored it like a ledger, a meticulous accounting of human darkness. The church, a fortress of moral authority, depended on silence. Confession was sacred, untouchable, untold. Yet even as Violet translated, as she repeated each whispered sin back to the priests, she noticed the cracks. Father O'Brien, the senior priest, had powder burns on his hands, explained away as a hunting accident. Ledger books were disappearing. Doors were locked when certain names were mentioned. Every gesture, every shadow hinted that the adults around her were not merely protectors of faith, they were architects of deception. And then there were the walls. Not just the physical walls of St. Michael's, but the walls of language, of culture, of unspoken power. Irish priests who could barely speak German, German parishioners who could barely speak English. The miscommunication was deliberate. It created dependency, control. People believed salvation required obedience, and obedience required ignorance. Violet, however, understood both languages and, with them, the machinery of manipulation. She saw the invisible strings, the way fear and piety intertwined to form chains that were invisible yet unbreakable. It was in those quiet moments, after the last confession had been whispered and translated, that she began to feel the weight of what she knew. Each sin lodged in her mind like a shard of glass. She could never forget, and neither could the church, though they believed a child's memory was fleeting, pliable, easily silenced. By the time she walked home along Cherry Street, lamplight cutting her small shadow into the night, the city itself felt different. Streets that had seemed safe, neighbors who had seemed kind, they were actors in a carefully maintained play, unaware that the girl who spoke their secrets had already seen behind the curtain. And one day that knowledge would not stay hidden. One day it would erupt. The machinery of human corruption always leaves a witness. And Violet, with her pale blue eyes and flawless memory, had become the most dangerous witness of all. It was a bitter February evening when the first cracks of Violet's silence began to show. She had walked past the warm glow of bakery windows, past the cheerful clatter of neighbors returning from market, and encountered Mrs. Brunhilde Zimmermann. The woman, a kindly figure in the Third Ward, called out to Violet, offering cookies and warmth like the world was still safe. But Violet's mind was already elsewhere, lost in the shadows she carried with her. Some people hurt children," she said, voice barely audible, almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the street's quiet. Then, in a tone that held more authority than her years allowed, she added, "Some men give bread to orphans on Sunday, but burn down houses with children inside when they live in Germany." Mrs. Zimmermann froze. The words didn't make sense. How could a child know such horrors? Yet the certainty in Violet's pale blue eyes, the way her gaze seemed to pierce straight through her, left no room for denial. The baker's wife recoiled, shivering, not from the cold, but from the realization that a secret, buried for years, had somehow crossed oceans, traveled through time, and lodged itself in a child's memory. Violet turned abruptly and fled, leaving a stunned Mrs. Zimmermann beneath the street lamp, her mind spinning. That night, the neighborhood felt thinner, fragile as tissue paper. People slept with one eye open, and somewhere in the shadows, others, those who had built their lives on lies, noticed as well. The confessional had been designed to protect, to contain, but Violet had turned it into a weapon. Every detail stored in her memory became leverage, a hidden power no one had anticipated. Names, dates, actions all catalogued with unyielding precision. And power, as always, attracts attention. The church, the community, even the dead past itself, it all started moving around her like magnets drawn to an unseen force. And here is the truth most will never admit. Institutions fear children who know too much. Not adults who defy them, not rebels who rise, but children. Because the uncorrupted witness cannot be bought, cannot be threatened. Violet's innocence was a lens, revealing the darkness everyone else insisted did not exist. The adults around her had assumed her obedience, her silence, her smallness, were guarantees of safety. They were wrong. The machinery of concealment, of moral authority, of social control was vast, but imperfect. And it was in that imperfection that Violet thrived. She became a node of forbidden knowledge, a living ledger of hidden sins. And yet, she remained a child, vulnerable, fragile, walking the thin line between revelation and annihilation. Tonight, as you watch and listen, understand this: knowledge itself is a form of power. Secrets, when spoken, can topple lives. And there are children who hold more influence than the men who think themselves untouchable. In a moment, I will ask you to commit a phrase twice to anchor your own awareness, your own descent into clarity. But before that, we must continue. The danger came quietly at first. A glance from Father O'Brien, too sharp, too calculating. Ledger books moved overnight. Whispers slipped through the streets, warnings in code, spoken to neighbors who didn't know they were listening. And yet Violet, small and pale, noticed it all. She had learned to read the shadows as well as she read people, to track the invisible currents that ran beneath polite society. It began with the confessions themselves. No longer were they the usual catalog of petty crimes and sins of the heart. Names were circled, events repeated with precision, patterns emerging that should have been invisible. Violet's mind recognized them instantly. This was more than chance, more than coincidence. It was orchestration. Men and women of authority of power were moving pieces, controlling perception, ensuring that the truth stayed buried. And she, the child who remembered everything, was the greatest threat to their carefully constructed illusion. By mid-March, she sensed it in the air. Conversations died when she approached. Windows shuttered when she passed. Letters arrived for her family with no postmark, threats couched as polite warnings. And yet, what the adults failed to grasp was the simple truth. Knowledge cannot be unlearned. Every attempt to suppress, to manipulate, to frighten her only deepened her resolve, strengthened the clarity of her awareness. It was in that moment that Violet realized something that few ever understand about power. It is never absolute. Authority is only authority when fear goes unchallenged. And fear can only control those who submit to it. She had already seen through the veil, understood the architecture of influence, the subtle methods of obedience, the quiet cruelty masked as tradition. The church, the neighborhood, even the memory of distant Germany, each was a network of interlocking secrets, each one relying on silence to survive. And yet, she remained a child, and children can be broken. The forces moving against her were cunning, patient, and merciless. They understood that she could never be allowed to speak freely, that her very existence threatened centuries of deception. Their methods would escalate. Their manipulations would grow bolder. But here is the paradox. The more they sought to silence her, the louder her truth became, reverberating like a bell no walls could contain. And you, watching now, are in a similar position. You have already seen the first shadows, already glimpsed the machinery behind everyday appearances. To lock in that awareness, repeat this phrase twice, aloud if you can, because words are power, and commitment is transformation. I see what others hide. I speak what must be known. Now, as you carry that energy with you, understand this. What comes next is no longer story. It is the mechanics of corruption, the blueprint of human manipulation, the revelation that even the most sacred institutions serve agendas far darker than their sermons admit. Violet's descent is only beginning. And in her story, you will find truths that echo beyond 1871, into every structure built to control, deceive, and dominate. By the end of March, the air in Milwaukee's Third Ward was thick with unease. Whispers traveled faster than the winter wind. Ledger books, meticulously kept by the church, vanished overnight. Every parishioner felt it, though none could name it. The walls were closing in, not just physically, but spiritually, psychologically. Secrets, once hidden, were now exposed at least to one small witness with memory sharper than steel. Violet had begun to speak fragments of what she knew, almost unconsciously, in casual conversation with neighbors, in moments of passing curiosity. Each phrase, each partial confession she repeated was a spark. The adults closest to the machinery of control reacted immediately. Father O'Brien's hands bore new injuries, unexplained and sudden. Doors that had once opened freely were now locked. And in the shadows, men moved unseen, to ensure that nothing, no ledger, no witness, no word could survive unmonitored. Then came the first overt act of intimidation. A neighbor's child disappeared for several hours, returning shaken and silent, warned not to speak of what they had seen. Objects in homes were moved. Letters to the Mueller family arrived with threats veiled as kindness, promising ruin should Violet utter another word. Each act was a reminder. Knowledge carries a price, and the price was never meant to be borne lightly. And yet Violet did not flinch. Children rarely possess the clarity to understand danger, but she did. She had observed patterns for months, decades of human deceit compressed into a year of meticulous observation. She recognized the methods, the hierarchies, the invisible code of compliance that bound the community together. She understood how authority exploits fear, how institutions use moral certainty to suppress the inconvenient truth. And most terrifyingly, she saw her own role in this system. the repository of secrets no one else dared remember. It was at this point that the church and the neighborhood realized something they had not anticipated. A child's memory is not a ledger easily burned. Violet's mind was a vault. Attempts to erase her knowledge to frighten her into silence only deepened her insight, sharpened her perception. And with each revelation, she became more than a translator of words. She became a translator of truth itself, a bridge between what the powerful wanted hidden and what the world had a right to know. The danger to Violet escalated because the knowledge she carried was not ordinary. It was proof of duplicity, of moral rot, of betrayal at every level. Priest, baker, neighbor, friend. Her awareness had become a threat that could topple reputations, destabilize the structures people depended upon, and shatter illusions carefully maintained for generations. And in this moment, the Third Ward understood a universal truth that most only glimpse in nightmares. Some secrets, once spoken, cannot be contained, and some witnesses, once awake, can never be silenced. By mid-April, the tension in Milwaukee's Third Ward had transformed into something almost tangible, a dark pulse beneath every cobblestone street. A low hum of fear threading through every home. Violet Mueller walked these streets carrying a weight no child should bear. Every word she had translated in the confessional, every sin she had witnessed, had become a spark that could ignite devastation. And now, the forces that had long depended on silence understood that one girl could unravel decades of carefully cultivated illusions. The first overt move came under the guise of civility. Father O'Brien summoned Violet's parents, Heinrich and Greta Mueller, offering reassurances while planting seeds of doubt and fear. "Children repeat what they hear," he intoned. "You must guard her tongue." But Violet, with her uncanny awareness, recognized the threat for what it truly was. A prelude. A test. The adults who claimed to protect her were preparing the stage for a purge, subtle at first, inevitable in its escalation. Then the burning began, not of buildings this time, but of evidence. The church's confession ledgers, chronicling sins of every parishioner, disappeared overnight. The official explanation: accidental fire. Yet the smell of charred paper clung to the air, and Father O'Brien's hands bore fresh, unexplained burns. Those who had dared to oppose the imposed silence or questioned the morality of destruction began to vanish or fall mysteriously ill. It was as if the shadows themselves were enforcing obedience, erasing anyone too close to truths deemed unbearable. Violet, small and pale, became both observer and instrument. She had seen patterns, connections invisible to adults blinded by faith, tradition, or fear. And she spoke, not in accusation but in fragments, in casual mentions that left the powerful scrambling to contain the ripples. Each revelation unnerved the pillars of the community, the men who had believed their sins could be hidden, the women who thought kindness would shield them, the priests who assumed their authority was unassailable. The girl with blue eyes held a power that no uniform, no office, no ritual could suppress. In those final weeks, the Third Ward became a theater of paranoia and dread. People watched shadows with suspicion, neighbors whispered with caution, and doors stayed locked even in daylight. Violet's knowledge had become contagious. It infected perception itself. And the adults who had once guided her, controlled her, assumed they could bend the child to their will, learned too late that knowledge, once internalized, is indestructible. By the time her fate was sealed, Violet Mueller was no longer just a girl. She was a mirror, reflecting the hidden corruption of a community, the dark architecture of moral rot, and the unspoken laws of power that govern human behavior. And the world would never look the same again, because once a secret is spoken, once a truth is witnessed, the machinery of control begins to falter and the observer, no matter how small, becomes unstoppable. The morning after the fire, the Third Ward awoke to silence that was almost unnatural. Smoke curled faintly from the remnants of the confession ledgers, now reduced to blackened ash. No one spoke of what had been lost. How could they, when the records of sins, crimes, and betrayals had vanished along with the paper? The truth, once written, was now buried in charred fragments and whispered rumor, leaving the community to wonder if they had imagined it all. But Violet's memory remained. Every detail, every name, Every act of concealed darkness was etched into her mind like ink indelible as blood. No fire, no threat, no act of institutional power could erase what she had seen and translated. And so the paradox of forbidden knowledge became apparent. While the world sought to obliterate proof, the witness carried the truth forward, a living ledger immune to destruction. The adults around her, once confident in their authority, began to fracture. Father O'Brien's composure slipped. Neighbors whispered with eyes cast downward. Families once secure in piety and tradition now moved cautiously, aware that the child who had seen everything might speak again or worse, that the memory of her awareness would outlast them. Fear had become an echo, amplified not by evidence, but by the mere possibility of revelation. Violet herself became a legend, whispered about in shadows. Parents warned children, "Speak nothing of what you do not understand." But it was too late. Knowledge, once glimpsed, refuses to be contained. Her story of translating sins, witnessing hidden evil, and surviving the machinery of control spread quietly through the streets, growing in potency as rumor intertwined with reality. To those who understood, she was both beacon and warning. The power of awareness could shatter communities, topple institutions, and expose corruption too long ignored. And there is a lesson here that reaches far beyond Milwaukee, far beyond 1871. Every system that seeks to control thought, that enforces obedience through fear, that relies on ignorance to maintain power, is vulnerable to the witness who refuses to forget. Violet Mueller, a child in appearance, became the ultimate paradox. Small, defenseless, and yet unconquerable, because knowledge cannot be unlearned and truth cannot be fully erased. Her legacy, whispered across generations, endures because the mechanisms she revealed, the manipulation, the silence, the moral duplicity of the powerful are timeless. Every institution that claims authority over conscience, every structure that conceals crimes in the name of faith or order, operates on the same principles. And Violet, through her eyes, reminds us that seeing is itself an act of defiance, and remembering is the most dangerous weapon of all. Violet Mueller did not survive long in the world of ordinary people. By April 1871, the weight of what she knew, the intensity of what she remembered, and the forces moving against her had converged. Yet even in her death, or perhaps because of it, she became immortal. The girl who spoke secrets no one should hear had ensured that those secrets would never truly die, because they lived on in memory, in whispers, and in the minds of those who dared to see the machinery of control. The official record listed her passing as sudden illness. In truth, no one knew how much of her fate was natural, how much orchestrated, how much the result of the relentless pursuit of silence. Father O'Brien and others in authority moved quickly. Ledgers were destroyed, evidence erased, questions deflected. The community returned to its routines, pretending the shadow that had passed among them had been nothing more than a child's fevered imagination. Yet the tremor remained. The Third Ward, once confident in its moral and social order, had glimpsed the fragility beneath its surface. And here is the lesson that cannot be overstated. Knowledge is dangerous. Not because it corrupts, but because it empowers. Those who see the machinery behind authority, the strings of manipulation, the quiet terror that underpins obedience, cannot unsee it. Violet's life and death are proof that awareness carries both power and peril. The powerful will try to erase it. Institutions will burn their evidence. People will dismiss the witness as fragile, impressionable, inconsequential. But the truth persists, as stubborn as memory itself. The echoes of her story reach beyond Milwaukee, beyond the 19th century, beyond even the lives of those who first witnessed her revelations. For anyone who has listened this far, her tale is no mere history. It is a warning and a key. It reveals the hidden architecture of control that still governs thought, behavior, and belief. It illuminates the silent hierarchies, the unspoken codes, the moral compromises hidden behind piety, civility, and tradition. And it asks a question that will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. Once you know, can you ever be the same? Violet Mueller's eyes, pale blue, unflinching, linger in memory like a ghostly mirror. They challenge every observer to recognize the truth hidden beneath the comfortable lies of society. She teaches us that knowledge transforms, that witnessing changes the witness, that understanding is a form of power. And if you, right now, repeat the phrase again, I see what others hide. I speak what must be known. You claim a fraction of that power. You step into the realm of awareness, beyond the illusions of control, beyond the shadows, forever changed. Some truths, once spoken, cannot be contained. Some witnesses, once awakened, cannot be silenced. And some children, like Violet Mueller, will forever remind us that seeing the hidden world is both a curse and the most potent gift a human can possess. If you're listening carefully, you already understand. Some knowledge changes a man forever. Drop a comment below with the phrase, I see what others hide. I speak what must be known. Say it twice. Let the shadows mark your awareness. And remember, once you know, you can never be the same.